Good evening, Browns fans, and welcome to Gang of Three, or Gang of Two tonight. Lane's not going to be able to make it. He's got some other stuff going on in his world. So it's going to be me and Pete again. We talked about the game last night, but we're more than anxious to talk about it a little bit more because it was such a wonderful game. But what I'd really like to do is I'd really like to base tonight's show around your comments and questions. Pete and I have some things that we can talk about, but we really want to hear from you. So if you're in the YouTube or Twitch chat rooms, please hit us up with whatever you want to talk about, and we'll guide the show that way. How you doing tonight, Pete?
Doing all right. How are you?
I am doing okay. Considering, what we went through yesterday and all the blowback today, things are getting interesting in Cleveland. Let's put it that way. Let's talk a little bit about some news of the day until our chatters offer up something for us to bounce off of. Obviously, 31-3, huge disappointment. And the media today in Berea was asking Kevin Stefanski about his job security, which is never a good sign if you're the head coach. And Kevin Stefanski says, I don't get into those type of things. My focus, our football team's focus, is solely on the Buffalo Bills. Obviously, watching the tape today, that's our focus. That's all we really care about. Do you think it's easy or difficult for Stefanski to keep his players focused in this sort of an environment, Pete? Do you think he's challenged by that?
Not particularly, because so few have the ability to sort of coast. Myles Garrett can stop playing, and he's going to get $40 million every year for however many years. Joel Petonio can stop playing if he intends to retire and get paid for that. There aren't that many guys on this team that are in that situation. And they structured it that way, particularly with the issues that they have financially with Deshaun Watson still on the roster and everything else. And they've got a whole lot of guys who are trying to prove that they need to be in the league. So, yeah, they can look at the standings and go, oh, woe is me. But they're sitting there going, I am trying to prove that I belong in the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't get a whole lot of that. And this is one of the things I sort of dispute is like, this is the thing that happens. The Browns lose and they lose badly. And then the immediate effort is, well, they didn't play very hard.
Mm-hmm.
They tried. They're just not very good. And, credit, the Bears played really, really well at points in that game, especially on offense. But like, they just don't have the people that can sort of like blow it off, because if they do, they then put themselves in a position where they can be out of the league real quick. So I think the other part of that is there are a lot of people on this team who need Kevin Stefanski to remain the head coach and to ultimately be successful, however you want to define that. Because if he's gone, their lives get sort of turned upside down, whether it's they're going to be gone to another team or potentially, again, out of the league. I would point right to the quarterback that they're currently starting as a guy that, this is the unpopular view of this. I think Shedeur Sanders knows he needs Kevin Stefanski right now. One, was interested enough to pick him and work with him and all these other things. But two, he knows as well as anybody, if they fire the head coach and somebody else comes in here, that guy's not that person is not coming in and saying, I'm going to take the 5th round pick and start the franchise with that guy, when I'm going to be sitting at latest projections are going to be the 2nd pick of the draft.
Right.
Their own guy. So no, they've got a whole lot of people who have to prove themselves. This is not the NBA or Major League Baseball where guys can just coast, or they have a bunch of guys on contracts that allow them to coast. It just doesn't work that way. So, what I saw yesterday was a beaten up team that just sort of got taken to them by a very good Chicago Bears team with everything to play for, that's on a roll. The Browns you saw the injury report on Wednesday like I did, and your immediate reaction was just like, oh man. And then you see the inactive list on before the game and you're like, oof, it's going to be rough. And when you have a couple guys like Shedeur Sanders may have had to Google his right guard who entered the game to know who, I don't know how many people know who Sam Webb is as a corner who's playing for Denzel Ward. Like, we're at that point of the season. And, the other part of this, which doesn't excuse any of this, is just if you looked at the scoreboard yesterday, particularly in that 1:00 window, there were 2 games that were competitive. Everything else was a blowout and not interesting at all. It's just sort of where we are. And unfortunately, the season is as long as it is. And there are a lot of teams who are just sort of dead and trying to figure out what to do next. As far as Kevin Stefanski's press conference, look, one, if you actually watch him, you don't get the impression he's embattled. And if he is, he's got a hell of a poker face because he doesn't play it like that. And I think part of that is because it's just how he's wired. But I also compare it to what else I'm seeing across the league. Zach Taylor got in this whole thing about walls and all this other crap, talking about how nobody affects him and all this other stuff, which certainly sounded like a guy who's affected. Or you run into the Jet situation where they give up, 48 or whatever to Jacksonville. It might have been 148. I don't know. So Aaron Glenn fires his defensive coordinator, which, nobody, this whole notion of accountability, nobody's sitting there going, oh, great job, Aaron Glenn. You fired your defensive coordinator. Let's get down to business. No, they're all calling it for what it is. Throwing a guy under the bus so you don't take the blame for it in this exact minute. And it makes Aaron Glenn look weak, and it makes the Jets look weak. And, this whole notion of, well, this is strong leadership because he's getting rid of guys who aren't getting the job done. It was immediately called out.
Right.
In the building called it out. The whole thing are sitting there going, Steve Wilkes didn't deserve this, but it's the nature of the business and all this other stuff. But it just paints a dysfunctional picture. And yes, the Browns look bad because it's 3-11 and all this other stuff. But if Aaron Glenn keeps his job, which now becomes a question, everybody immediately pivoted. Well, does that mean Aaron Glenn's going to lose his job after the first year? It's going to impact how he hires next year. It's going to impact who he hires next year because people look at this and go, he just threw this guy into the bus. Do I really want to jump into that guy's staff? Do I really want to go to New York and play for this organization? So I don't know what's going to happen with Kevin Stefanski. As far as his job status, I continue to watch it, how the team acts. They continue to not act like a team that's ready to make major changes. That could be a huge surprise coming, but just the way they've handled things, particularly with these young players, particularly with the quarterback they're playing right now, it just sort of looks like we're just trying to figure this thing out and use these games to get to a certain end, as opposed to necessarily we're trying to win these football games to save our jobs or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's certainly enough motivation for the players on this roster, or most of the players on this roster, to keep playing, besides their paycheck. But certainly a lot of them do not have guaranteed deals in 2026. They need to be playing for, if not the Browns, at least, their next employer. One of the comments you made, Pete, as you were talking, was that the team looks like it's not giving a lot of effort because it's not as talented as the opposing team. And I found this to be a constant refrain over the years since 1999. Our guys are a little bit more disorganized. Our guys are not trying as hard. They don't care as much. It's the coach's fault, all that sort of stuff. When in fact, it's just they aren't as fast as the other guys, or they aren't as big as the other guys, or they aren't as talented as the other guys. And it looks that way to an observer, that maybe they're not trying as hard, but in fact, they're trying hard, but they're just not as good as whoever's across the line.
Yeah, I mean, look, the first quarter was not good. There were a lot of issues where you can point at the first quarter. Now, the whole wristband thing got stupid in a hurry. The idea that, I was sort of led to believe by including one media member that like Kevin Stefanski is literally the guy who's putting a little piece of paper in the wristband and like it's his fault and he should be fired for it. When Shador was asked yesterday, and then Kevin Stefanski was sort of asked to sort of, explain what happened. He had the wristband with the right card in it for the first drive, and apparently some time between the first drive and the second drive, the card got misplaced. So they had that whole issue where they couldn't get the play call in because the number doesn't correspond to the right play. So they have to stop and get it sorted out. So they switched wristbands with, I think, probably Bailey Zappi. Does it look good? No. Is it the end of the world? No. But I literally saw a reporter say they should fire the entire regime over this when it's something that, one, the quarterback could have done himself. Two, is probably an equipment guy / quality control coach. But this is sort of like the state we get into when the season is where it is. And we just get tired of looking at these people. And then we get to, well, we've got to fire everybody because of that. Now, again, the first part of the first quarter looked bad. Special teams continue to suck and put them in weird positions, and then they get a couple penalties that look bad, and they're immediately down 14-0, and it's sort of off to the races, except they did sort of find their footing. They got the field goal. They had a chance. They were in Chicago Bears territory 14-3 with a chance to sort of make it interesting and threw an interception, unfortunately. But they stopped the penalties. The defense got sort of back on track, and then ultimately too many turnovers, and the Bears are good, sort of ran away with it. So I can sit there and understand why people look at this and go, oh, it's a disorganized mess. I'm sort of done with it. But again, that's just sort of how I like in the moment makes total sense in terms of what this team's trying to do. You've got a rookie quarterback who looks every bit of a rookie quarterback, looks every bit of a quarterback who wasn't coming out of college ready to hit the ground running and has sort of acknowledged how much he's had to learn mentally. He's trying to run an offense, which by and large is now full of rookies, or a guy who literally just showed up the other day to play right guard.
Right.
There is certainly an element of you're going to have some of this stuff. Do you want it? No, of course not. And ultimately that's what they are. At the same point, like, you know, if I'm trying to look at this thing, I try to look at where do they go from there? Again, they sort of got back on track. They were able to sort of get their feet under them and start figuring things out. And then again, not good enough. They're trying to learn a lot, particularly Shedeur Sanders more than anyone is trying to learn a whole lot against the Bears defense that does a whole lot of things that I don't know that he's ever really seen before, and got him in multiple situations that made him look bad. Now, I ultimately thought, you know, his performance was more positive than the 49ers game, even though the stat line looked worse, because I thought he was working some stuff out in a way that he wasn't against the 49ers. And I thought he was trying like hell to take what he's being coached to do, apply the stuff he's doing, and try to get better at it. And there's a couple, like you throw an intercept to a linebacker, like at some point, do I want that to happen? Of course not. Do I want to coach? Am I going to coach it? Yeah. At some point, I got to be like, the Bears linebacker made a hell of a play. He just underneath, tipped it up in the air, caught the ball, that type of stuff. But like, my whole thing with this situation is like, I don't know what people expected from Shedeur Sanders outside of the people who are so deliriously convinced he was going to be the savior that, you know, it was going to be magic and suddenly he was going to carry you to a bunch of wins that never made any sense. This is what a 5th round rookie looks like. And the stuff he's got to work out, he's got to sort of figure out while playing, which is fine. Like, I'm okay with watching. I'm certainly not advocating that Sanders should be on the bench or anything else, but it's also like, if you're sitting there going, I'm so angry that this team's not winning, they should be winning football games. I look at what they've got out there, and I'm trying to understand where you think the wins are going to come from against a team like the Chicago Bears, who are really good at home, have all their guys. The Browns, well, most of their guys. The Browns are down a whole bunch of guys, and this is what they're trying to sort of work on. Like, it sucks, but like, this is sort of how the sausage is made in terms of what the Browns went into this year planning to do and what they're trying to make with it.
Right. It does suck. And, you know, I'm watching the chat room comments come across, and there's a little bit of sarcasm there about the future of the Browns and the head coach and all that. And I totally get it. You know, I've been running this site since 1999. Most of the years have been horrible. You know, I've seen this again and again and again. But there's two questions, right? One question is, would you fire Kevin Stefanski? And we all have different opinions on that. The next question is, will Jimmy Haslam fire Kevin Stefanski? And that is very, very difficult to speculate about, as you pointed out, Pete. I got an email before the show from someone who said, you know, how do you think he'll blow it up? And I guess I would say the most likely outcome is that both Stefanski and Barry keep their jobs. The second most likely outcome is that Steph goes and Barry stays. And then the least likely outcome from my perspective is that they both go. But neither of us have the slightest idea, because the only person who makes that decision is Jimmy Haslam. Well, D and Jimmy together. So it's next to impossible to predict what we're going to be going through in the month of January right now.
Yeah, so much of it depends on what Jimmy Haslam really wants, really wanted out of this season, what was important to him. Because I think the Browns, in a lot of ways, as much as we can look back and go, well, they could have won this game, this game, which are that's absolutely true. They could have 6 wins or whatever. I think they need to be where they're at, like in terms of the draft. And that sucks to hear, but like if they end up with the second pick of the draft, I think that's a really good spot for them to be in for what they need to do. The scenarios you laid out, I still think keeping both is the most likely. And the bottom line for me comes down to this. If firing Kevin Stefanski tomorrow and Barry, or some combination thereof, would make Deshaun Watson disappear forever, I think the Browns would do it. The problem is that contract's not going anywhere. The person is literally going to be there. That's part of it. The other part is the job, and that this all feeds in the same thing. I think they realize what the job looks like right now and what this means. I think part of it is also that Jimmy Haslam finds a lot of use in Kevin Stefanski, because Jimmy Haslam, certainly there's a certain amount of abuse he always gets. But Kevin Stefanski is a great human shield. Like, he just takes all, honestly.
Yeah, I get it.
Everybody directs everything. And Andrew Berry's benefiting a little bit right now from Kevin Stefanski as well. So much of this is focused on Kevin Stefanski's the guy. He is that lightning rod. He takes all of the abuse. And the second he's out of the way, Jimmy Haslam now has to eat all of it. It becomes, you still have Deshaun Watson. You now have to hire a coach, which you've shown you have not been very good at. You're also you're on top of all of these things. You're trying to build a stadium, and you're charging me what for PSLs? Like, it just snowballs and snowballs and snowballs. I think that's really useful for him right now. And it's very easy to paint the picture. I should say it's easy to do 2 things. One, it's easy to say it's to blow it up. And it's easy to say that, don't fire them because of the unknown. What I would pivot to say is, in a lot of ways, I think the Browns structured their team intentionally, even if the results are worse than they probably anticipated. We all went last offseason go, man, they really got to address the offense. And they went Malik Collins, Mason Graham, Carson Schlesinger, and did a whole bunch more things on defense. And to me, it just felt like, it continues to feel like, they loaded up the defense in part to be like, yeah, we're going to get some pieces on offense. Harold Fannon's really good. Quinshon Junkins really good. We're going to take this cost-effective approach to quarterback, which I actually really like. I actually think this is really smart, and I kind of hope they apply to the offensive line this coming year, where they basically said, look, man, Deshaun Watson's costing us a ton. We don't have a lot of flexibility. They went out and they tried to sign various quarterbacks in free agency and were turned down for reasons that we've covered in depth. I would just, from a broad perspective, there are a couple quarterbacks who said they did not want to go to a team where they were going to be playing in front of the drafted replacement. You can do the math on who those guys were, but the Browns were certainly not going to sit there and go, well, we're absolutely going to not draft a quarterback this year to make this guy happy, which I think if people found that out at the time would have been like, what the hell are you talking about? You promised player X that you weren't going to draft quarterbacks for this guy. And one of them has been god awful, to be clear. If one of those 2 quarterbacks has been horrendously bad, if that was the guy you ended up with, people would be understandably pissed. So you said, we're going to take a bunch of swings. Did Kenny Pickett get anyone excited? No, but he cost you a 5th-round pick. Did Dylan Gabriel cost you anything? No. And no, before anyone asks, that was not the guy I would have picked, but nevertheless, it was a 3rd-round pick. You take Shedeur Sanders with a 5th-round pick, cost you basically nothing to take a flyer on him. And then you get Joe Flacco, which was the cheapest veteran who had some familiarity and nostalgia, all that crap. You had 4 quarterbacks. 3 of them represented swings where you could see maybe we can get something out of this guy. And as we sit here today, one of them might, which is pretty good. Like, because if this all failed, you recouped the cost of Kenny Pickett with the trade of the Raiders, which looks really good right this second in terms of the trade value. And if you gave up a 3rd and 5th to get a real quarterback, you're going to be thrilled with that because it also enabled you to get Mason Graham, Quinshon Judkins, Carson Schlesinger, Harold Fannin, and Dylan Sampson. That's a really good haul to then also potentially get a quarterback. And if none of these things work, if they all suck, you're still in position to take a real shot at the quarterback, which they still may, at this point, right as we sit here today, should take if they're in position to do that. So, like, I like that plan. And as we sit here and I look at what the Browns are going to have to do on the offensive line, I hope they employed a similar plan. I hope the Browns, this past year, the Browns were sort of stuck in this weird spot where they had Wyatt Teller and Jack Conklin on these contracts. They had Ethan Posick. So they just fortified it with more veterans. Great. Well, if all those guys are gone, I would lean into it and do the same thing. I would take a million swings. Now, I hope some of those swings are 1st and 2nd round and 3rd round picks or whatever, and all that and trades, whatever you can do. But I hope they get like 10 to 15 guys and say, we're going to figure this thing out. Use the sort of roster spots to their advantage. But like, part of the reason I like this front office is because I think they're willing to do that approach. I think they're willing to take that shot. I don't know how many people are sort of willing to think outside the box in terms of finding answers to that thing. And the other part is like, because they've structured it the way they have, I don't care who the head coach of the football team or the GM. Everybody knows what this team has to do this offseason. Now, the problem is if you blow it up, some of those things may change in terms of all of a sudden you get guys on defense that now we're talking about, well, this guy doesn't fit and we don't do this and all this. You create some more issues. Whereas whoever the head coach of this team is next year, you're sitting there going, we got to get a new offensive line. We got to get more receiver help. We've got to get a quarterback. So from that standpoint, it's a question of, does changing help you, or are you just attacking the same issue with a guy you like, theoretically, if that's Jimmy Haslam's feeling, then I think that's probably the way to handle this thing. And if it doesn't work after this year, then Deshaun Watson is suddenly out of the building. Then the contracts sort of are better in terms of where they can go financially. And maybe the job's more attractive because now you have a real offense, hopefully real offensive talent in place. Those all sort of feed into this whole decision-making process where I think there are a whole lot of people willing to jump out of the plane, and I don't know if they know their parachute's going to open once they get out of it under the current situation.
Yeah, understood. One of the comments here from Kenny Lanzo, talking about the quarterbacks, said basically they wasted time with Pickett and Flacco. I guess I sort of think they would have wasted time with just about any quarterback you brought in because they weren't going to be able to throw behind this offensive line very effectively anyway. But I did see a media article today, and I'm not going to point fingers, but one of the questions which came out was, do you trust Kevin Stefanski to groom a new quarterback if he's the one who orchestrated, who ran the quarterback fiasco in training camp this year? And the first thing that came across my mind was it was Andrew Berry who set up those 4 quarterbacks, not Kevin Stefanski. And I'm not sure exactly how you would have gone through this any differently than the team went through it once you're set with those 4 quarterbacks. They seemed to split the repetitions in a way that made sense, holding Flacco back a little bit.
Yep.
Although there's a lot of disagreement about, how much action Shedeur got with the first team or whatever. This is the fascinating question that gets asked on our forums when people get very angry about who the Browns have. And everybody asks, who should they have gotten? And the answer usually comes back, I don't know. That is ultimately the problem. And yes, there are people who go, well, Jackson Dart,
They should have gotten Jackson Dart. Well, Jackson Dart just was evaluated for in the concussion during a game, evaluated the 5th time this year as a rookie, 5 times. And he hasn't been taken out in these concussions other than the one. But the amount of times you have to check on this kid's brain is entirely terrifying. And I've said this, and people say I'm crazy. If this was happening in Cleveland, people would be panicking. People would be, oh my God, what are we doing? We're going to ruin this kid. He's going to have a short career. And we used a 1st-round pick. We traded up to get this kid, and I don't know how long he's going to be able to play. Right. So you go down the list of options they had, and keep in mind, let's remember what people were talking about. Not from this website, talking about Shedeur Sanders as the 2nd pick in the draft. Now you get Joe Flacco, and you get Kenny Pickett, and you get these 2 rookies. I'm old enough to remember when in training camp, people were mad at the Browns because they weren't giving Joe Flacco more reps. I'm old enough to remember they were worried because Kenny Pickett was missing so much time with injury, and they were actually saying the Browns were giving too much time to the rookies to work on their development. So this is sort of the weird game we've ended up in, where people are simultaneously mad for not spending enough time with Flacco, trying to get him ready. And by the way, I don't know that criticism isn't valid given how this offense came out. I think Barry's right. I think the offensive line and the offense in general sort of made it irrelevant. I don't think Joe Flacco repping the entire way was going to prevent that. But at least it's an argument where I can sit here and go, yeah, you know what? The Bengals or the Ravens are at a massive advantage when they're only focusing on getting all the reps for Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow. But the Browns, and this is where, you talked about Andrew Berry set this up and everything else. They clearly said themselves once they got 4 quarterbacks, we have to figure out how to do this. So the Browns, to their credit, with rookie camp, they brought in enough guys to get full teams. Now, it's non-contact, so you're not getting real full team drills. But 7-on-7 was fully competitive. You had non-contact team to get these rookies as much time as possible. Then, when they got to OTAs and training camp, they managed to spread their resources in terms of coaching staff and everything else around to run teams on 2 fields. That sounds like it's not a big deal. Most teams in these situations, especially when it comes to team, are running one team on 1 field. So you are coming up with a way to get more reps. And yeah, you can sit there and go, well, Shedeur wasn't getting with the 1s. No, but he was getting reps with the 3s and 4s. Like, he's getting reps. That's certainly better than him getting nothing and taking mental reps on the other side, or Dylan Gabriel doing the same thing while Joe Flacco and Kenny Pickett can get reps. Like, and this is sort of where I get to this thing where, like, I like the fact that the Browns sort of said, hey, here's the problem. Let's come up with a creative solution for it. Now, as we sit here today and we go, oh, they're 3-11. Clearly this didn't work. Maybe and maybe not. And the part that may work in their favor is what you saw from Shedeur Sanders against the Tennessee Titans, which was almost 400 yards of offense, because maybe they structured this in a way to sort of set him up to try to get him reps early on. And then people laugh at the Hungry Dogs period and all this other crap. I bet there's a whole lot of quarterbacks who wish their team would have done that for them, right? Because as opposed to not getting reps. And then the individual meeting time, which, Kevin Stefanski will answer about when he's asked, but by and large, that is players talking about this stuff going on. It's not Kevin Stefanski, for whatever you want to say about him. He's certainly not what I would describe as a self-promoter. So this is the stuff where I sit here and, as somebody who's coached and looks at these problems and sit here and go, this is the situation we're presented with. How can you come up with a creative way to deal with it that may put you in a better position going forward? And it's not going to help you for 2025, but it might help you for 2026. You got a ton of guys, a ton of reps. You got a ton of rookies, a ton of reps, both the quarterbacks and then a bunch of these other places. And if they can get through this and come out positively, they're going to be way better for it next year. Assuming this coaching staff survives, I'm curious if they were to, again, using the offensive line as an example, if they were to take a similar approach, how would that look like? Where they go, we've got to do the entire offensive line, and we're going to lean into this thing and really get it going, and we're going to come up with creative ways to try to evaluate as many offensive linemen as possible, get a whole bunch of guys, and find 5 guys who are going to get this thing going and get it in the right way. because one of the things that, the one biggest thing I watch from the Bears game is just sitting back and going, man, I remember when the Browns could do this in 2020 and 2021, where they just ran over people and had 2 running backs that looked good and all this other stuff. And so I hold Andrew Berry totally at fault for not planning ahead when it comes to the offensive line. They've done a lot of good things in other areas, but the offensive line is the one where, like, I've been saying, I'm sure Barry's in the same camp where we've been saying for like 2 and 3 years, you got to get more guys ready to go in this because this is coming and the clock is ticking. And now we're here and we weren't ready for it. And now we've got, a situation where we're going to have to overhaul the whole thing. It can be done, but it's obviously very tricky.
Yeah, it will be tricky. This is a time of year where we sort of fantasize about what the team could look like in 2026. And, there are some interesting offensive linemen out there. Tyler Linderbaum for the Ravens, a very interesting guy. Is he going to want to come to Cleveland? Even if you write him a really big check, I guess it would have to be really big to get him to come to Cleveland after what he's seen the last couple of years. It's just going to be a challenge to get some of these guys because the reputation of the franchise is a place where careers go to die. Or are you not as concerned about that?
Well, there's 2 parts to this. One, agents love Andrew Berry. Say what you will. They like dealing with him because he's easy. And that's not to say that he's a pushover. He's not. But he's very straightforward in how he deals with agents. They like how he operates. And when you go to the Browns, you get paid. They structure the contracts in a way to make sure guys get paid while still allowing them to continue to maneuver. So, and historically, the Browns have actually done pretty well when it comes to premium offensive linemen. I mean, you go to Eric Steinbach's and various guys that's always been the weird guy they've gotten. Now, I don't know if Tyler Linderbaum's the right answer or necessarily the guy who wants to come here, but I don't immediately look at it and go, this is a disaster. And a lot of it's going to depend on, who's in charge at that point. If Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski are here and you sit there and go, man, they've got a great defense and they're set up to really just add, an onlooker may sit there and go, man, Quinton Judkins is a pretty good player. Harold Fann's a really good player. If they get the quarterback situation worked out, I'd love to block for this crew. I don't know the answer to that.
Right.
But it's different than sort of like trying to tempt a wide receiver who's sitting there going, man, I have no idea who's playing quarterback. That's a more challenging situation for that. So it could be a difficult climb to get a guy like Tyler Linderbaum to come here or Rasheed Walker or whoever it is. But that's could be part of a creative solution where if they can get one premium free agent to sort of lock in and be the leader of the line, and center, even if you're paying him $20 million a year, would be that's an expensive pivot to get to. But if you're sitting there going, man, Linderbaum can really lead the line and put these guys in great situations, and we love his mobility. I mean, he's a hell of a center, really good athlete. And if you're sitting there, man, we want to get back to zone blocking and outside zone, which Kevin Stefanski's traditionally done. Haven't been able to do this year because the guys they don't have the guys anymore. Guys slowed down. They're just not as good as they used to be, or they just don't have them. Linderbaum would certainly be like, yeah, we're going back to zone blocking, or we can go back to zone blocking and get right back to that identity and do those things. So it's certainly an option. We'll see what happens, or if the Ravens find a way to somehow keep him and get him to stay, because their offensive line situation is pretty concerning in their own right.
All right. Well, Chef is organizing a chat barbecue at my house, which is not well advised. It is cold and we have a security dog here. But let's go to some of the other comments that we've got here from today. I want to put this one up. Now, Coinlito has his mind made up about Shedeur Sanders, it seems, from his comments. But, he's got a comment in here about how bad the QBR was for Shedeur. And if you read Sam's article earlier today, there were some numbers in there that were a little bit scary. Are you concerned by this? Pete, these numbers, or is Shedeur more passing the eye test at this point in time?
He throws picks. Picks are going to kill your QBR. I mean, that's sort of the deal.
Mm-hmm.
What I watch is a guy who has not seen what the Bears are throwing at him. And Lane and I both tried to plead with people coming out with Shedeur Sanders that, like, there was all, depending on who you listen to, he's a great processor. He reads defense really well. One, he's not a great processor. He hasn't been. And two, the Big 12 doesn't run that many defenses. Not to say it's not what it used to be. It is not the old school, everybody scores 50 all the time, but they're not running a bunch of complicated defensive schemes. And when you run the type of offense a team like Colorado did, it can sort of manipulate what teams are allowed to be able to do against you. But that's also sort of the nature of just being a young quarterback. You don't see a whole lot of stuff, and you got to experience it, and it's tough. And these are things he has not been able to learn. Some of this is, gets touchy for people because then it becomes, well, you're attacking the one head coach he's had in football ever that's not named Kevin Stefanski, who happens to be his father. But you have to understand that, like, Deion Sanders or whoever, first job is to win football games, and development comes second. So I think in a lot of ways, particularly when they got to Colorado, is like, there's probably a lot of things they would have liked to have been able to do in terms of his development and get him into a better place. But ultimately they had to sort of do what they did, which is basically say, listen, man, we need you to make plays. We need you to carry the offense, and we'll live with some of the other stuff because we give you enough weapons that you're going to ultimately be able to outscore most teams. Obviously, that didn't happen in their first year at Colorado. They were terrible in terms of the record. They won one conference game in the Pac-12 at that point. Then they went and won 9 this past year, or his last year, and then Colorado back to 3 this year. So now this is just my read on it. I think part of the reason Shedeur Sanders is so fired up and like energetic in a way that might even rub people the wrong way in a post-game press conference like that, like he had Sunday, is because I think in some ways he's really excited about the fact he's getting to learn all this stuff and he hasn't been able to. And yes, he could easily be defeated and be like, man, I was terrible and all this other stuff. And I sort of appreciate the fact that he's not like that. I do think there's a part of him where he's like, man, I'm getting so much out of this. And he just wants as much information as possible to get better. The interceptions are not great. Obviously, he put one off Jerry Jeudy's chest, which is a great, great ball. I want him to throw that every time, and hopefully Jerry Jeudy will catch the next one. But like some of the other stuff, he's just never seen it. Having said that, there's also plays where you watch that tape where I can see things that he didn't see earlier in the year where he's seeing it now. And the post he threw, the first post he threw to Isaiah Bond is one of those plays. He recognizes a complicated coverage call by the Chicago Bears. He gets great footwork, throws it right on time, and he puts that post right in a spot. It's a beautiful ball. Bond makes the catch, and he's tackled. And this is sort of where I look at this and go, I can see the growth. So if you sit there and you look at the QBR, it looks awful. And if you're somebody who's sitting there and goes, I don't believe in Shedeur Sanders, games like yesterday make it very easy to go, see, I know he can't do it. I would say for the people who really do believe in Shedeur Sanders, don't let games like yesterday discourage you too much because he's just not experienced it. And he needs to sort of do it. And this is sort of why I desperately hope he can stay healthy for these 3 games, because I want to see him get as much of this as possible. So when they go into an off season, hopefully with this group intact, especially if I'm talking from his standpoint, they can give him a whole lot of stuff to work on that he's never considered before, that can make him a better quarterback. He's also getting better in the pocket. There were still a couple sacks he can't take. There were still a couple issues he has, and he needs to do better with his footwork. But you can also see how hard he's working to sort of apply what he's learning in the pocket, to be smart. He had a couple really nice scrambles. He had a couple really nice situations where he was able to elude pressure entirely in a way that, based on his college tape, looked like it was not going to be a thing. So there is growth there. But like I said earlier, this is what it looks like when you're trying to develop a quarterback like Shedeur Sanders when you aren't in an offense like, say, the Denver Broncos when they had Bo Nix. One, obviously, he's a first-round pick, but two, he could rely on the fact that they had a really strong offensive line and a run game, and he had receivers and all this stuff. And Shedeur doesn't have these things. He's got Jerry Jeudy, who's a fine receiver. He's got Harold Fandon, but Harold Fandon, who's a really good player, is a rookie. Gage Larvadain, rookie. Isaiah Bond, rookie. Cedric Tillman was sort of limited because of his lack of practice time this week. And then he's got the offensive line situation, which we've talked about. So, like, it just allows for such a huge roller coaster ride that when it looks great, you're really excited about it. But there's going to be these just awful valleys because they've just got so much they've got to do on that side of the ball. And you're just hoping the Browns, and by virtue of just the game, how it works, they're jamming so much information to these kids and hoping they can absorb at least some of it as they go. And they may sort of learn more after the season than some of this stuff, but it's difficult. It goes fast, and you don't know when these guys are going to sort of like make jumps and make improvements. But what I would say is, like, I'll look at it, pivoting a little bit away from Shedeur Sanders, like, we're starting to see it from Isaiah Bond. We're starting to see growth we need to see from Isaiah Bond, who has been, was wildly unproductive at two major colleges, still has issues that he's working on, but all of a sudden he looks like a deep threat. He looks like he had catches of 47 and 42 yesterday. They only had 3 points. I think if the offense is going well and the Browns have more stuff, and all of a sudden Isaiah Bond is this huge surprise where you're just like excited about this guy who's occasionally making a big play that makes the offense go. Like, Isaiah Bond is a really good fit for Shedeur Sanders. And I think, and Shedeur Sanders talked about in the postgame, like he wants more of that stuff. So you can be incredibly demoralized and discouraged by what you see from Shedeur Sanders. I get it. For somebody who's been a skeptic, because when I broke him down, I said he could be a long-term starter in 2 years or out of the league in 2 years. I'm more inclined to think he's going to be at least in the league in 2 years for sure. It's just a question of how far he can go. But I am impressed by how much he's been able to learn in such a short time, even if it doesn't always look like it in terms of the numbers.
Right. Well, you sound a little bit like Kevin Stefanski, which
which I noticed too in the press. Look, I mean, you're right. It's 100%. Like, this is the thing. Coaching quarterbacks is not easy because there are times where, and the San Francisco game was this for me. That's the game where you want to throttle him because you're sitting there going, just throw the ball to the open receivers. That game was incredibly discouraging because you can see it and he's not throwing it. He's not doing those things. This was a different deal. And I can't get into Kevin Stefanski's head, but I was not surprised when he's sort of like, there's a lot to be, sort of encouraged by what he saw on the tape, because I agree with it. It's not where you need him to be. You're not betting your job on him, but he continues to be at least interesting to me, which frankly is, I think, above where I expected him to be by the end of this year.
Yeah, and the message from Shedeur after the game was basically, let me go learn from this. Let me go see what I can figure out on the tape, and so on and so forth. It was not throwing other players under the bus. It was not him, saying he was in a bad position. It was, what do I learn from this, which is really, really a positive way of looking at it. Let me cruise through some of these comments that we got here. This one is from Levi. He says he's hearing from a friend who works for the Browns that the game is getting close to a sellout. Bills fans are getting cheap tickets, and Haslam is going to have to hear the Bills fans taking over his stadium on Sunday. This is something that I think we could have foreseen, given where the Browns were going. And it's just going to dump that much more pressure on Jimmy Haslam to do something, and react in some way. I don't know if he will, but, I guess my question about the Bills, they had that fantastic comeback against the Patriots, Pete. You think the Bills are a team that might experience a letdown, or you don't expect to see that coming?
Hard to say. The Bills are have been a very inconsistent football team. They don't have great receivers, but they've run the ball really well. And Josh Allen has been sort of a roller coaster in terms of he was outstanding in this game, but there's some other games where he's turned the ball over. Their defense is not great by any stretch. I think it is going to kill them in the playoffs, just the way it's structured. They have weirdly small. They have a combination of big, slow DBs that just don't work to me. I think the structure of their defense is sort of flawed. I think they've gotten exposed by a couple teams because of how they are built. As far as like the Bills taking over the stadium, you know what? He's selling tickets. Like at some point, like that's part of the deal. The other part of it is like I'm sort of a little confused by this. I'm old enough to remember when there were people saying, well, the fans shouldn't buy tickets until Shador's in the game. I'm not seeing a huge uptick of fans. Like,
yeah,
where's the, this is sort of the problem I have. Like, say this while I'm enjoying and excited to see what Shador can do. But like he's supposed to be this huge marketing force, which seems to be great for online discourse. But like, if he's not good and he's like, which is, big if he's not good and he is sort of distracting in the energy he brings, you could live with that if he's selling you tickets. If Jimmy Haslam's like selling out the building, he's going to be perfectly fine with dealing with the noise. But that isn't happening. So that's sort of a disconnect for me. But overall, I this is the price of doing business. Jimmy Haslam is going to make money on this football team without selling a single ticket. Yeah, that's how the NFL is structured. So
yeah, exactly.
He can be annoyed, he can be embarrassed or whatever. Is that a good reason to fire anybody? No. It's a good incentive to sort of figure out the best way to make your football team work. Great. I'm all for that. But beyond that, so what? Like, the Pittsburgh Steelers have their stadium taken over regularly the second things looked bleak for them. So I'm not overall worried about that. It's the nature of sports. And the other part about that is like, and why I think building a dome is a really good idea, is it's really expensive to go to football games, to sit there and freeze your ass off and then not enjoy it. So like you're competing against really good TV, which is not difficult to buy. And you can basically get a great TV for basically what it costs to go to a game at this point. So there's all the more reason to just be like, do that. And if you're somebody who's out of town, get to, Sunday ticket, and you're going to pay way less than you would if you got like season tickets or whatever, which I'm sure Jimmy Haslam doesn't want to hear, but that's a huge reason why they're building a dome.
Well, Haslam will do well this Sunday if there's a bunch of Bills fans, because I do, from the Bills fans I know, they do imbibe a lot of beer, and they're charging about $10 a can for it down at the stadium. So he'll make plenty of money. Let's go through some other of these comments. Chris MS, our buddy, says, has Tillman ever had a good game?
Yes, he beat the Baltimore Ravens.
Yeah, he had a string there. Was it last year before he got hurt? Where he was pretty solid.
I like Chris. This is the unpopular opinion. I love Cedric Tillman. In the game he got knocked out of last week when he got thrown into a car wreck, he had like 88 run blocking grade by PFF. He does all kinds of dirty work, and a lot of it, what's been happening with the offense, particularly against like the 49ers and some of these other things, they've been using him as sort of this guy who gets people out of the way to clear space for Jerry Jeudy and Harold Fannin. Again, this is one of those things where I think Cedric Tillman is best a number 3 receiver in your offense. I think he's between his health being unreliable, and it's not he's like frail or anything. He has really bad luck, especially when you get thrown into car accidents. But the stuff he does, I've always admired the fact that he never complains, gets in there and does dirty work. And when you throw him the ball, he catches it. And he's a big, like when he got knocked down and ultimately had to leave the game against the Titans, he's so big. I thought it was Blake Whiteheart that was on the ground. That's how, I mean, he's just a huge person. And I do think there's a huge value with that. I wish the offense was better because I think Cedric Tillman has been a guy where when things are going, when things work well around him, he becomes really viable. And that 3-game stretch you referenced, which, like I said, he beat the Baltimore Ravens with a number of big plays in that game and some of the other stuff he does. He just doesn't get a whole lot of targets, or he's gotten targets this year and has drawn DPI penalties. So, again, should be a number 3 receiver. I would love nothing more than to have Jerry Jeudy be your number 2, get a guy like a Cardinal Tate, a Mekhi Lemon, or somebody else to sort of fill in and be that number 1 or 1A, 1B type thing. I think if you had that, people would be very happy with this group because that also includes Harold Finn and whatever else they're doing. So they just need another big time weapon there, and it will set everything else up. But I like Cedric Tillman.
Yeah, he's had some solid performances as a Cleveland Brown. He is a big dude. If you look on our YouTube site, there's an interview between Fred and Cedric. Fred's not a tiny guy, and Cedric, is just gigantic. Brian wants to know what happened to Jamari Thrash. Well, he was waived the other day,
but he's back,
and he's back.
He was resigned to the active roster. Yeah. So, look, here's the problem. For all the reasons I just talked about, the Browns are going to be in a situation where somebody's not. Obviously, some guys aren't making the team this year or next year if they get a big time weapon. But they are also in a situation where they clearly really like Isaiah Bond. They clearly like what Malachi Corley can offer them in terms of some of the other stuff. And he caught one pass that I thought, I liked what I saw yesterday. He's a nice little guy who can do some stuff that I think Kevin Stefanski really likes having. And then Gage Larvadain is the punt returner. So those 3 guys have to be active. And so Jamari Thrash has not sort of outperformed those 3 guys. So when push came to shove and they needed a roster spot, they were willing to waive Jamari Thrash and apparently not worried that somebody else was going to grab him. He clears waivers. The Browns just re-signed him to the active roster and then waived Garrett Dillinger. If, we're going to see, I don't know if Thrash is going to be back on the field again this year or not, but if Jeudy is here and Tillman is here and we hopefully draft another big time weapon, like there's a whole lot of guys that are going to have to be fighting for spots or, if a guy gets hurt or whatever. And Thrash is going to be in that group where he's fighting for his livelihood. So that all that sort of situation illustrated is how tenuous his sort of spot is on the Browns now, but certainly as we look ahead to next year.
Right. We had a guy by the name of Raul Havana visit our chat room and was throwing out a bunch of zingers. One of them was Johnny Football was drunk dialing Jimmy last night for a job. I can tell you that is false. And it's false because Johnny Manziel already has a job. I learned today that Johnny Manziel has been hired by Bleacher Report to do reporting on the Texas A&M college football playoff game, which I think tells you all you need to know about the state of the sports media in 2025. Some good questions from Fumble here. Let me pick one of those out. He says Jeudy can't possibly be number 1 next year. Who do you take, Tate or Tyson, or do you try to get Lemon lower in the first round? Interesting predicament.
I mean, the number 1 doesn't really matter to me all that much, but whatever. Like, again, I look at it as he can easily be 1A or with a 1B. But more importantly to the question, I would move Tyson below Lemon based on his body. He had a ACL, MCL, PCL tear, I think, as a freshman. He has just every year has had issues with health. This year he's had issues with health, shoulders, hamstrings, all this. I love his game. He is phenomenally good at being a wide receiver, but he is always hurt. Or he's constantly dealt with injury, and I'm not messing with that at all. Tate, to me, it's Tate and Lemon. Personally, I think Tate is just easier because you know what he is. I love Mekhi Lemon. I think he's an absolute baller. He's 5'11", 195 pounds, maybe. He plays bigger than that. He's so good at winning one-on-ones. He's great running routes. The case for Mekhi Lemon comes down to, do you like what Jackson Smith and Jigba does for the Seattle Seahawks? That is what Mekhi Lemon is theoretically going to be offering a football team in the NFL. Having said that, teams may get weird because he's not a 4.3 speed guy. He's probably more like a 4.5 guy, as was JSN, closer to that. Although the thing with JSN, I would be quick to point out, elite change of direction skills, sub 7.3 cone, and just like otherworldly short shuttle. Like that type of quickness is insane. I would be very curious to see if Lemon tests that stuff to see if he can sort of match up. But like JSN is legitimately an elite company when it comes to that stuff. But Carnell Tate is classic 6'2", 200 pounds, runs, close to a 4.3 and all that stuff. So like, and being able to go, I can put him at extra Z without thinking about it. Like he probably gets the nod for me between the two. Just curious to see, one, hopefully he stays healthy through the whole playoff. I think the Buckeyes were sort of being a little bit cautious with his health, understandably, because they have eyes on the larger prize of trying to win a national championship. But that would be my small worry with him is, are we going to find out that he's had, physical issues that are going to sort of make you a little bit cautious? But just on what he does, I would love to pair Carnell Tate, his route running and all the things he does with Jerry Jeudy, with Cedric Tillman, with Harold Fannin. To me, that's an easy add where I think Mekhi Lemon, I love him. I would absolutely be thrilled with it. He's a little bit more nuanced in sort of the different ways you'd want to use him because he's probably more suited to be a slot receiver, which again, one of those things where you're sort of like, yeah, do we really want to take a slot receiver this high and all these other things? I just Tate is very easy in so many ways.
Yeah. Well, Mark Smith sort of disputes it. He says they need to trade back from 3 to like 10 and pick up another second. You can't take Tate or Tyson at 3. And I'm seeing Tate, who was originally a bottom of the first rounder before this college season started, going that high, 2 or 3. So let's say the Browns are in position number 3. Somebody else, Raiders or Jets, snag Mendoza, and we're left there at 3 with Carnell Tate on the board. Somebody offers you a 2 in their first round draft pick. Are you tempted by that? Or is it entirely dependent on where in the draft they're sitting?
No, if they offer me what you just said, I'm taking it. But look, there's so much time left in the draft process. I'll say this right now, based on what I'm looking at, just in terms of sort of figuring out where the board's going to land, I wouldn't be sure Tate's going to last to 10.
Yeah.
But if you're offering me the package that Barry just threw out there, I will happily take Mekhi Lemon at 10 and not think about it if I'm getting all these players. It could be a scenario where, the Browns finish with the second pick and, the kid from Oregon declares Dante Moore and the Browns sit there and go, well, we could take him or we can take a whole lot of stuff from somebody because we're not necessarily super sold on it and do all these other things. As I said, a lot can change between what's going to happen in the draft process with some of these guys potentially moving up or down or whatever. I would not get attached to the idea that you're going to be able to get Carnell Tate in the teens and be like, oh, this will be great, because everybody else is going to be sitting there going, he does all these things. You can look around the league and look how many teams are desperate for wide receiver help that are going to be at the top of the draft. The New York Giants are probably going to be in the conversation with receiver help. They cannot take another, I guess they theoretically could, probably not going to take another high-end pass rusher. And if they're not going to take Dart, if they're not going to do, you run out of things to take that are premium position, wide receiver is absolutely one of them. So they could absolutely take Tate. Browns are sort of in a similar spot. There aren't a whole lot of things for them to take. So they could easily take a wide receiver. So would it be unsatisfying in some small way if they are stuck taking a guy like Carnell Tate at 3? Perhaps. But, we just did this whole thing where, some people weren't satisfied with taking Mason Graham at 5, or we're sitting there going, man, I wish the Browns would have taken Tet McMillan at 5, or taken, Emeka Ibuka, who's, kind of fallen off the latter part of the year, not to knock him, but like through that lens, if right now, again, we're going to get through this whole thing, I would take Carnell Tate over both those guys without hesitation. So I have no problem with taking it that high, but I'm 100% with the idea of try to finagle. If you've got Arvell Reese sitting there and teams want to trade up for him, if you've got Caleb Downs sitting there and teams want to trade up for him to facilitate, particularly getting more picks into 2027 and keeping the gravy train rolling to keep allowing you to get premium players and draft picks isn't a dream scenario for me if you're not going to be in a position to take a quarterback.
Right. What do you think about Denzel Boston?
I don't love him. I think he's interesting. I need to do more work on him. He's huge. He's another big receiver, not technically big, but he's a big guy. I'll be curious to know if and what he runs. Certainly, he's been super productive, really productive for Washington, and Damon Williams and him went off in the bowl game. I don't love guys that sort of have to live in a 50-50 ball world. I'm sort of in the Ben Johnson camp of I want guys to be open, and then occasionally I have to make a 50-50 ball work. Great. So I don't love that type of receiver, but I'm not like anti. And Denzel Boston would be later in the round, probably in the 20s, though that could change, I suppose.
All right. Well, we have some other questions, but a lot of them are things that we've dealt with through the course of the show. So I think I'm going to wrap it up here at this point. Pete, thanks for your insight. We will be back here along with Mr. Lane Atkins, hopefully next week on Gang of Three, and we will talk about what happened against the Bills. Thanks, everyone, for showing up. Thanks for all your comments and questions from the chat room. They were great. And we will see you next week, next Monday at 7:15 p.m. for Gang of Three. Good night, everybody.